Good evening, Bill.
Good evening, Sandi.
Do you want to ask me how I am, or should I ask you how you are?
Let's mix it up and you ask me how I am.
Bill, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm much better now that we are here doing speaking of seeing, thinking, feeling.
Okay.
Um, and this evening, thinking, feeling is thinking about how one feels something for art, whether we always do feel something when we view art.
Is it your contention that we do?
I'm looking at it, I'm asking myself, do I always feel something in response to what I see?
I guess the
Like,
other question is there a threshold that it has to go above where you actually consciously notice that you're feeling something?
yes, and also how thought is applied to that feeling or indeed creates feeling.
Sure.
We tend to think about our feelings, and I question whether we actually feel anything in an emotional sense, in that a thought brings an emotion, or there is an emotion and the thought can navigate it sometimes.
Yeah.
But in the
Yeah.
practice of seeing or viewing, I wonder whether we are actually thinking about what we're seeing or whether we're feeling something about what we're seeing, whether we're doing both simultaneously or whether they're in fact the same thing, or whether, particularly, this idea of feeling acting independently, autonomously from thought.
I think that there's certainly some sort of blink reaction that happens when we look at art. Whether something hits us or not, whether something is attractive to us or not, whether something is ugly or not. And a lot of times I find that if I'm walking around a gallery or a museum, there's lots of stuff around me that doesn't seem to do anything at all. It doesn't move me at all. It might if I sat there and I looked at it for a while, or if somebody explained something to me, or if I discussed something. But I really do tend to start with, does this get my motor going or not?
But when there's an absence of feeling,
Yeah. Is
is
that a
that
feeling?
is that still in reaction to something?
Yeah, I think that goes back to my threshold thing where it's just like,
Mm.
yeah, maybe it does something, but I don't care enough to give it my conscious thought, you know?
But not caring has an element of choice in it, no?
Sure. Yeah.
Hmm. Sometimes I wonder if this painting is as powerful to somebody who's not British. In the
Yes.
same
I don't know who this is. Who is this person?
Yeah, in the same way that I wonder whether this painting is as powerful to somebody who, for example, is in their 20s. Um, really to be kind of 30 or older
Right.
and British, this is a highly provocative image. It's a painting by Marcus Harvey and it's called Myra. It's from 1995 and it is a depiction of the Moors murderer, Myra Hindley. And this particular image comes from the photograph that saturated our press. She and her lover, Brady, uh, kidnapped, tortured children and
I don't
hid
even know if I know this case.
and hid their bodies on the moors. They're called the Moors murderers.
So what's this made out of?
So before we started recording, you said to me, "Is that meant to be like that? Is that pixelated?" It's actually a painting made up of handprints, child's handprints.
Got it.
And actually, I mean, Harvey used a plaster cast of a friend's child's hand to make the image. It's a very, very large painting. It's like, well, 9 feet by 11 feet.
Okay.
And it's very imposing. It was originally shown in the Sensation show at the Royal Academy in London. And it truly is monstrous and compelling. And you viewed it through doorways. So it was kind of framed and you could understand the real kind of magnitude of it. Anyway, really anybody who lives in Britain has been exposed to British press, especially yeah, I would say sort of my age, definitely older. This face and the face of Ian Brady are kind of iconic.
Yeah.
I mean, horrific case, but it's more the still watchfulness of Hindley that people have found so crazily, again, compelling for all these years since the mid 60s. This would have been the photograph that was released on the front page of the newspapers. This was the photograph that was released to show the nation the face of the cruelest woman that ever lived.
Do you think that to that point, even looking back to the 60s and looking at Warhol things of Liz Taylor or those kinds of, that there are, again, younger people who have no idea who that is, no idea vague idea of who Marilyn Monroe even is, other than the sort of icon that Marilyn Monroe is now.
Well,
It's just totally different,
I talked to the little ones at school about this actually, because we study Andy Warhol in year 7 when they're 11.
Yeah.
And lots of them know Andy Warhol's work about Marilyn Monroe. And they know that she was a movie star. But apart from knowing to connect the word movie star with that icon, with that face,
right,
they don't know anything else really about her. Some children sometimes know that she sang to the president in a sparkly dress.
Right. But do you think that, to that point, though, do you think that those kids that the connection that the public has to the work of an artist like that or a piece of work like this is time dependent, right? There's a window there where it has more impact than it would later.
Yes, I do. And, even with you there, the fact that I turned a slide, it's very interesting in context of our topic. You're not loaded up with the same history.
None at all.
Of this. And so in seeing this, you might see a watchful gaze from a very intense seeming female figure, form. But you're not seeing a woman who actively participated in the sexual assault, torture, and murder of children.
Did they ever say why they did it?
Gratification, pleasure.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny. I don't think I don't know anything about that case. Like, then again, at the time in 1995, I was in college in Boston. I don't, you know what I mean? It may have been that I just wasn't reading the newspapers at the time.
Well, no, I mean, the murders themselves were in the 60s, as I said.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Right. So, Marcus Harvey, I mean, the sensation show that this was in 1997, right? But this is from 1995. So 30 years after the Moors murders, people are still triggered. And in actual fact, the first day this was on show, 2 separate incidents of people attacking the painting. It had to be taken away and put behind glass or like a perspex sheet. It had ink thrown at it, and I think it had eggs thrown at it.
Is that a matter of like, how dare you give publicity to such a terrible person?
Yes. No.
Like the Boston bombers on the cover of Rolling Stone, that kind of thing?
Yeah. But one can't forget that this also, as a monumental painting, is something that is intended
to shock.
Or if it's not intended to shock, it's certainly intended to give us pause that we're supposed to know or remember And I mean, Harvey also is a fantastic painter in terms of process. His process-driven painting is really kind of brilliant. I do question whether, when I know about this person, how much I can separate my feelings about this person from what I think about the painting. And if those two things anyway can be ever separate or should be.
Well, I mean, I think in this case, the artist was specifically making the painting in order for your feelings about the subject to give you probably an 80% boost on however you felt about it normally. If this was a picture of his neighbor Anne that he found in a box out by the trash because she had died, I don't think it would have been part of that show, right?
Oh, it's
in some ways, this is obvious. This is like me making a painting of Trump right now. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, yeah, he's a jerk. Half the people hate him. It's going to get a rise regardless. You know, it's a bit of a cheat,
but not exclusively. You know, there's lots of playing with the convention of like why we paint people, for example, as well, that we could consider. So, for example, to take your painting of Trump, there would be some people that would find it celebratory and other people who found it an offense.
Sure.
Right. Whereas with this, there is really nobody who's going to think anything really.
There's 6 crazy other pedophile murderers in the country that we haven't found yet who think that it's great, but everyone else hates her. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, even Myra Hindley herself, by the way, wrote to the Guardian newspaper and pleaded for it to be taken down from prison. So
that's rich of her.
She understood the incredible problem of this painting. I mean, Marcus Harvey understands the problem of the painting. You had Mothers Against Murder, Mothers Against Murder and Aggression, Mama, protested with one of the mothers of one of the victims about this painting outside the Burlington building.
You could also argue that Marcus Harvey knew exactly what he was doing and he wanted all of that.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I do want to just read what he said. He said, the whole point of the painting is the photograph. That photograph. The iconic power that has come to it as a result of years of obsessive media production. Now, I think that's a very interesting thing and a very smart thing to say, because it's true that this image has actually been reproduced thousands of times. And each time it's reproduced and is shown to a nation, the nation takes a little bite out of it, takes a little piece of it, and somehow cements it in our cultural memory.
Sure.
And is he doing anything really different to that? Is he doing it?
He's adding his process to that.
He's just adding a process that's different. That's all.
I don't think the transformation that he made is, honestly, I don't think it's as interesting as the source work. As he said, it's all about the photograph that he began with, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
but it challenges how we feel. It challenges how we feel when we feel something afresh for an image that has become, in this case, kind of indelibly inked into our minds. You know, this image appears anytime there's any talk of, you know, women as killers, or, you know, there's lots of things as she, you know, got older, her life in prison, you know, lots of things about it. This picture gets wheeled out.
Sure.
Why is it any different to have a painted version? Now, yes, the painting is made up of a child's handprints. That's meant to add to the grim nature of what this is. But shouldn't it be what it is?
But in some ways, isn't it the fact that he's making it a painting of this photograph, it shows that it's become part of the cultural source material,
Yeah.
at that point. I mean, I'm trying to think of what would be the equivalent here. Maybe Charles Manson stuff. You know what I mean? Like something like that.
Mm.
From the 60s, or some of the Manson murderers, and they always wheel out these crazy pictures of them when they're in court and they're all nuts. And now they're all like old people in their 70s, Has she died since?
Yeah.
It's interesting to me. It's always interesting to me when people make, you were talking about all the different people who protested, including herself and all these, mothers of children or whatever it is, as if this is somehow positive propaganda for this woman. If anything, to me, it's just a reminder of how awful she was.
Also, what is it doing? Is any image laden with an intention to make us feel? When artists make work, are they making work always with an intention to create a feeling?
Yeah, it's not what you make, it's why you're making it.
No, but can we answer are artists working anywhere now in a way
trying to create feelings in their viewers?
And how is that different from an artist who doesn't really want us to engage with thinking?
Do you think that there's artists who don't want you to think about their work?
Well, this is what I'm looking at. Is there art that we don't think about yet we feel something for? Or is feeling only something that comes about through a process of thinking?
I think sometimes we desperately feel for art and what we see, but I think most of the time that occurs without a lot of thinking. It's because of prior programming. It's like us looking at, I don't know, the Pietà or something like that. There's so much wrapped up in the Western world about Jesus and Mary that like it just has this imbued meaning, despite the fact that it's just, a man in the arms of a woman in a statue or in a painting. But I think you can feel a lot about that without actually thinking too much about it, just because the Western world's so indoctrinated in those stories, But I think if you're making art that is outside of, I mean, in some ways, the photograph of this woman has been elevated to that point where people aren't thinking about it, but they're still mad about this because they're mad about her. They're not mad about this painting. They're not really mad about the photograph of this woman. They're mad about what this woman did, but somehow the photograph has now gotten to the point where it's so emotionally charged that you don't even have to think about what this painting actually is, and you're still already upset about it.
So the symbol adopts itself.
Yeah, which is why I generally feel like this kind of work is like a cheat code for artists. Anytime that there's like built-in cultural exaggeration or anything like that inside of somebody's work or the subject matter, I'm just like, yeah, you could do that, but like that's just cheap. Is that a painting as well, or is that one something else?
No, this painting. He is a painter. I mean, he really.
Okay, yeah. I'm just saying that this one in particular looks. He's a painter, but this one is also very photographic.
Yes, and I mean the work is the discourse around the nature of painting in kind of like the post photographic era.
But I mean, this one has the same kind of thing, which is like, okay, we're gonna have a subject matter that is obviously, religious and gendered in nature, that's meant to shock. That's going to get you regardless of what you think of the work.
Are you shocked?
Well, I'm not shocked. I'm very uneasily shocked.
But is that a thought that's blocking a feeling? Is that a thought that says, aha, no, I'm actually too intellectual and too knowledgeable to be shocked anymore. I am a man of the world.
No, I think that there are things that I'm shocked by. This is just sort of like, I see what you did there. Cute.
Look at it. Look at that reaction right there. If you really, really watch your thoughts with this, is that not just a smug intervention of somebody who's educated?
Would I be shocked with this if I came in as a 14-year-old without all the knowledge that I have now?
Yeah.
No. I'd be like, hey, look at a hot woman showing her underwear behind a door, maybe. But I also don't have I am not on the conservative end of morality when it comes to sexuality and gender. So,
but those things are constructs, right? They're
sure
intellectual structures that we put in place. I'm wondering about this emotionally.
Are you shocked by this?
We take out the intellect. Can we do it?
Well, I don't think you can separate thought from feeling entirely. I think the two interact and it's somewhere in the middle, right? I mean, that's just the reality of the human mind. What you think and what you feel, as we all know from our day-to-day interactions with other people and relationships and stuff, are it's a big soup, and sometimes we can talk ourselves into feeling, and sometimes we can feel ourselves into believing.
Indeed. Through feeling, do we actually do we transform how we think through feeling? Or are we satisfying our thoughts by feeling?
Like some sort of implicit bias that we have, so we only believe the feelings that support what we want to believe. Maybe.
And your question, would I be shocked if I saw this and I had separated my thoughts from my feelings? Probably, actually.
Are you shocked as the person you are who has all the knowledge and history and art?
I think I consider what it is that actually does startle me. Those kind of elemental things that are about my lizard brain operating at the back of my consciousness. And
go ahead.
I'm not reading this necessarily as a woman in a burqa.
Yeah.
But I am reading this as somebody who's observing or seeing something that perhaps I shouldn't.
Oh, I see.
I mean, that's documented about this type of painting. He painted lots of this series that are kind of looking through glass. It's a glass door.
Do you buy that Harvey is genuine in his intentions, or do you think that he's manipulative? Or
well,
do you think that those things
that in itself can kind of be explained and manipulated by...
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even as it was coming out of my mouth, I was thinking you could take that 700 different ways.
No, but also, I mean, there's lots of, again, this idea of like supporting evidence and knowledge that we could gather about Marcus Harvey. All you need to say is that he's part of the Young British Art movement, and he's was very close friends with Damien Hirst, and immediately my feelings transform.
Sure.
Right. And in the same way, I could also say something that to me registers as something much more positive. In that, he not just was part of that group that were in the sensation show, Young British Artist, the crowd that would have been coming out of Slade Goldsmiths and the Royal Academy in the late 80s. Those people have a kind of level of notoriety in a way in the most contemporary art history for being deliberately provocative in a way that does perhaps become boring to people who've thought past the actual thought that would have gone into any of this.
5 minutes in, it feels cheap.
Well, he also founded Turp's Banana Magazine and Turp's Painting Academy in London, which is like an alternative vision of what it means to be in art education, giving painters a chance to kind of immerse themselves for a year in their painting practice in a kind of college setting in amongst other practicing painters. So he's done in that sense, there's probably a lot of good in terms of the vibrancy of an art scene in Britain, for example, in London. It is very, very hard, I think, to truthfully look at any of his work without being bowled over by either too much thinking or too much feeling. And I find it very difficult to synthesize the right balance of each to then meet this work without having some kind of irritating, dominating kind of preconception almost.
It's interesting. I mean, even my reaction to both of these, I like my art when it's more subtle. When it's more, if it feels like it's yelling at me, I just want to tell it to shut up.
But when we get past what this appears to be yelling about,
sure,
what else is there?
Well, the problem is that by then I've moved on. You know what I mean?
Isn't that the folly of all viewer?
Could be. Yeah. I'm not saying that. I think the problem is, Heather and I spent probably 8 hours of our trip to London in art museums or more, and we looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of work. There's always another I can look at. You know what I mean? I can't look at every piece of work that anyone makes for hours on end trying to get past my initial reaction to it. Because there might be something else that holds my attention more easily right down the wall.
So you have fear of missing out about painting?
Yes, but then, absolutely. Yeah. And if I feel like if I've given X amount of time to something and I feel like it's not hitting me, it's okay. I can't read every book that's ever been written. I can't watch every television show. I can't care about every painting that's ever been made. And that's okay. I mean, I have my personal preferences and the things that hit me both from a thinking point of view and a feeling point of view. Wow, it's really pouring outside. Sorry. And that's, I don't feel guilty about it anymore. I used to feel weird about it, but now I'm like, I like what I like, and that's okay because I'm 47 years old. It's also funny because, you said that he was, of this school of people in the 90s, it's like, what was that guy's name who did all the type design that was all Carson? Is that the guy's name?
What
used to do like all like the weird like type that was all over it. It was like a real look in the 90s and stuff.
Oh, in the 90s.
And it always drove me crazy that style. Art in the 90s, I didn't like art in the 90s. It's like, and even now when I look at it, I think, yeah, it's just, even though it was like at the prime time for me, I should have loved it. This is when I was in college. This is what was new and impressive when I was my most, impressionable. And yet there was something about that always turned me off. And so I don't know, it's just interesting to me and why that is.
Yeah. I mean, I ask myself, if I'm not feeling something, what am I thinking? And if I'm not
okay if you think something but don't feel anything?
I do think I will question why I'm not feeling.
And will you bear the weight of decades of knowledge about art onto it to try to give it meaning?
No, that's also not what I mean. Perhaps it's too simple what I'm actually getting at here. Um, there's nothing necessarily intellectual or knowledgeable about responding with emotion. What I find
Wait, say that sentence one more time. I'm sorry.
Oh, I can't remember exactly, but essentially I was saying there's nothing necessarily intellectual or knowledgeable about feeling.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it.
Okay. Yet so often we are muddying our feelings with what we think.
Yeah.
And around the other way as well, of course. But back to this idea that, you know, you meet something and you maybe don't like it, or you feel nothing for it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at that point, I ask myself, what am I thinking about not feeling? Like, why am I not feeling? And that in itself actually,
well, maybe it's just bad. Maybe it's just not good.
But that is still actually making a kind of emotional response, isn't it?
Sure, but in that case, you feel something about everything, and then this
Well, I know you've
conversation
become very, very irritated with me in the past when I've said yes, that's true. And then you're like, well, what's the point of any art then if all art's art?
Well, no, it's you know, at a certain point you have to put down demarcations of some kind, you know.
Well, back to your idea of threshold and tolerance then.
Yes, absolutely.
Where do you have the line of looking? Where does it take you to until you think no more? And when you think no more, are you feeling?
What does feeling mean if you're not thinking about what you felt?
Indeed.
I think you need both of them for it to have meaning. I think thinking plus feeling equals meaning.
And both of them rely on memory or not?
Yes, because emotional memory is there too. I think a lot of the stuff that you see and react to, the people are not upset about that first painting of the murderer woman. That's emotional memory. That's not like knowledge memory that they're, you know. By the way, no, it would be emotions multiplied by, because then if either one of them was zero, you'd end up with zero meaning.
Do try not to talk about maths on this show. You just confuse me.
Sorry.
Anyway, thinking, feeling. My big question to myself is, are they the same thing? Does one beget the other? One always seems to inform the other in my case, I would say. And actually, do I know what either of those terms actually means? Do I have a clear sense of what thinking is? Do I have a clear sense of what feeling is?
And where the demarcation between the two is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say no, you don't have those things, because I don't think anybody does. But then again, what would this show be without you and I? Be much less interesting.
I don't know about that. Anyway, Bill Wadman.
Thank you, Sandi.
Always a pleasure and never a chore.
There you go.